regardless of how oriented people are with the food system, they still don't fully know that you can grow multiple rounds of a crop in a year. So a lot of us think like, okay, tomato season or zucchini season is only this like 1 month of summer. But that's not actually the case. In our gardens, depending on your zone, you can grow several successions of a crop. And what I mean by that is a succession would be like one planting. If you have a crop you love, ideally you should have that crop as a baby seedling, an almost mature, and then a planting that you're harvesting off of right now. And that, just learning that alone, the succession planting was such a game changer for me of realizing, wait, it doesn't have to be so fleeting. I could have another round of this crop coming up next.
Welcome back to the Beet podcast. Today, I am your host, Jacques, aka The Garden Hermit. And we actually have a very special guest on today, Logan Hailey. She is the blog editor. So she is a crucial member of our team who helps run our blog, keep all the articles nice and accurate, and always keeping up with new stuff. And I've actually followed Logan for a while in the past. She used to make all sorts of content as a traveling farmer, and we're just so happy to have her on the team. So thanks for joining us today, Logan. I'd love for you to give your own little brief introduction because you have a pretty interesting story and a lot of interesting background experiences.
Hey, y'all. Yeah, nice to talk with you again, Jacques. It was really cool visiting you. Must have been at least 6 months ago that I was down in San Diego. Yeah. But yes, I have quite a diverse background. And first, I guess I should describe how traveling farmer even makes sense, because that seems like a blatant oxymoron. So basically, when I was 16 years old, I went to college, didn't like what I was doing, and I ran away from college to become a traveler and fell into all different sorts of subcultures, essentially, from, hippies to hobos to train riders, to all these different things. But the common thread between them all was living outside and being with nature. And as someone who grew up in suburbia, I had zero connection to the land. And so when I began traveling is how I fell in love with plants and with the wild and with just being outside. And one thing led to another, and I eventually discovered farming. I went to Oregon, settled down for a little bit in Corvallis, Oregon, to go to Oregon State University studying ecological horticulture. And that is when I actually started farming. But I still had the travel bug, and I still do to this day. That was over 8 years ago now. So I created a business called Rambling Farmers to figure out how to travel to different farms all around the country doing short-term consulting and contract work while being able to see as many different growing regions for gardeners and farmers as possible.
There's a lot we could get into, but I have to jump in for a second just to say I also appreciate, like, when I was changing career paths, I guess, the thing I knew I loved was being outside, being in nature, and food, like how food is made, where it comes from, growing food. Super fascinated by it. That's actually how I ran into, before I even started this whole journey working with Epic, I was like, I'm either going to stick to this PhD or I'm going to go be a farmer somewhere and just figure it out. Just grow food, because at least then I'm contributing to people, and I love everything about growing food. The idea of traveling around is also really interesting because a lot of these farms that you would visit are small farms, and a lot of small farms really don't have like immediate labor around them, right, to help and figure out things. And you might have to work with like random people who maybe don't have as much experience that you're able to learn going from farm to farm. So like totally love everything about that. And I love the idea of traveling around from farm to farm and offering, like, whether it's like the literal labor of farming or also consulting with systems and figuring out different markets and methods and how to do that. So super cool. I love that you took that journey. And I'm sure you've learned a lot about gardening on the path while also farming that whole time.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm super grateful I took that path. And while it wasn't the most financially lucrative, it was incredibly enriching for my soul and my connection to the earth. And the interesting thing is that the type of farming community I was in, I think a lot of people, when they hear farming, we imagine, me in overalls on a giant tractor in an endless field of corn. Like, that's what people
Right.
think of.
That is what farming that people think.
Yeah, and that I find to be very sad because that's only a very, very new and modern form of agriculture that has existed for less than a century. The industrialization of farming began, kind of at the beginning of the 1900s, and that has culminated in this basically tremendous divide, tremendous land transfer from small scale holdings that have existed for literally thousands of years. And when farming was really a lot more like gardening and homesteading for the bulk of human existence and human agriculture, and only recently has it shifted to that. So the type of farming I was doing was not industrial scale farming. It was actually a very niche area called small scale market gardening. So
Right.
very similar to maybe a lot of our listeners are growing gardens on their land to produce food for their family, but a market garden applies those principles to either a farmer's market or a CSA, community supported agriculture model, which uses like weekly veggie boxes to get produce to the community. But all in all, these farms could be 1 acre, 5 acres, 10 acres. I did work on a few farms that were like 50, 60 acres, organic
Oh,
farms that
wow.
did more like broad wholesale. Yeah, but overall, we were mostly small scale, hand tools, hand labor, trying to tread lightly on the soil and on the land to produce like really high quality specialty vegetables and fruits that are more coveted by chefs in the culinary world. And Jacques, you mentioned like you're the one who really felt drawn to farming because of the food aspect and actually looking for flavor.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Like, it's just such a thing that's missing that people don't know.
Yeah, and why is it? I've noticed this when I worked farmers markets so often. Like, people didn't understand why our food at the farmers market just tasted so much better than the grocery store. Why do you think that is in general terms?
So I have a couple of thoughts on that. It's super interesting. I love thinking about this because even even like I feel like my tomatoes that I grow in my garden, I still think are better than anything I could get at the farmers market. There's really good tomatoes at the farmers market. I think part of that is like some like personal feeling that it's better because I grew it. But in general, these smaller farms, especially these like like really though, but these like market farms, especially the smaller guys and who are organic, they really, for them, it's all about, I feel like, the soil, because if they mess up their soil, they're going to be in a really bad time. They're going to have to rely on very expensive inputs to get around it. When I say something like inputs, I mean like a traditional organic, or I don't know, I'm not gonna say traditional, a small scale organic farmer of sorts, they're gonna rely on like things like compost, cover crops, organic based fertilizers, things like that that really feed the soil life in your soil that then feed your plants, which can then access more parts of your soil. They have better access to the nutrients. Everything's more broken down and ready and available to the plants compared to something where you're really relying on inputting a lot of synthetic fertilizers to get the plants to grow. You're cramming them in to maximize yield and profitability for transport. You're not harvesting things at the right time. You might not be growing them in the right season. And like all those things, it's crazy um how used to going to the market we are and just like buying a tomato any time of year. Or like I'm gonna grab a banana any time of
Yeah.
year. But even for me, like I could grow my tomatoes into winter, but they don't taste as good. And I'll still eat them because they taste better than anything I could get at the grocery store for sure. But it's like seasonal eating,
Yeah.
really caring about it and like really building the nutrition in your soil. I feel like that's probably a big part of it. It's the care and choosing the right varieties, growing at the right time, and bringing it to people because you're excited. Like they are excited to see you eat that produce because they put the work into it. I don't know. That was kind of a long answer, but I think all of that impacts it for sure.
Absolutely. Well, you touched on like the multifaceted nature of what makes food taste good and what makes food nourishing for our bodies. And so that's actually a great caveat in my story where I became through farming and culinary world very passionate about nutrition because I love the
Mhm.
soil and connecting with the soil, learning about the microbiome, which is the diverse billions and billions of beneficial bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes that can exist in a healthy soil ecosystem. And the way that those make basically everything on Earth function, it's funny to think that the smallest organisms that are invisible to the naked
Yeah.
eye are actually like they're the root of the ability for plants and animals to exist on the planet. And industrial farming looks at soil as this disposable thing, just like till it, grind it, spray it, destroy it, make it uniform. And we all know in our gardens, our soil is our most valuable resource. And so I was lucky enough to be on farms that also thought with that similar mindset. And through that, they were able to grow more nutrient dense food. And now there's a lot more modern research coming out validating scientifically these things that we've
Oh yeah.
intuitively known. Like Jacques was saying, like, you know that your garden tomato tastes better because of the love you put into it, because you know what went in
Yeah.
the soil, because you chose a really good heirloom variety that you've been growing, etc. But now the research is also showing that we experience a lot more nutrient density and bioflavonoids, which basically correlate to flavor,
It's like the flavor
when we
compound. Yeah.
have our plant. Exactly. And when we have our plants growing in living soil, that actually enriches them and makes them more flavorful, which makes them more palatable and makes them healthier for our guts and for like our entire vitality as human beings.
It's like it's crazy to think. I think for a lot of people, especially if you're a gardener, you've now almost certainly experienced this. If you've grown anything from the garden and had a bite, you're like, why is this so much better? It's like it's crazy how not only do people who haven't gardened yet or are still beginning to garden, but it's just you don't know where your food comes from and you don't know what it looks like. Like, what does a bush bean look like? Like, what is that plant? Like, do they grow underground?
Yes.
Like, are they on trees? Like, people don't know and they haven't experienced it. And it's even like to the point of, I think about this a lot, like getting a little on a tangent, like, but the taste of the food is so important to me. Like if it didn't, if the tomato tasted like it did at the grocery store, I wouldn't bother growing it. It would not be worth my time, my effort, and I wouldn't get any joy out of it. Like it would just be like, okay, great. Like there's a tomato plant, cool. I have tomatoes. I don't like to eat them, but I think about it all the time. That's why I do things like I add like azomite, which is like a volcanic rock that's pulverized, that's full of different sorts of trace elements and minerals that my plants might not have because my local soil just might simply not have those minerals present. So I go maybe a little bit extreme on the overboard for it. Like I'd really try to make sure my produce is delicious because it is also the majority of what we eat is produce. Like we love it. And I love coming outside and just cooking whatever the heck is available in my garden.
Oh, yes. And that makes such a difference. You touched on the remineralization of soil, which is something I'm also so passionate about because once I went more into the nutritional and holistic health world, you realize how many people are so deficient in vital nutrients and minerals, and then you're just taking all these supplements. And then we realize when you trace that back to the source, why are we missing all of these? Is because our food is devoid of the minerals and vitamins, and it's because our soil has been destroyed. And so it's like
Yeah.
full circle. And then we have these solutions where people, like kids, don't like in general, kids don't like the taste of produce. But then all of a sudden they grow a garden or they go to the farmer's market and they eat a carrot and they're like, oh my gosh, I love carrots. Mom, buy me more carrots. And
It's
and it makes sense that like our bodies want that. They want the healthy soil food.
it's crazy too because this last winter I grew so much broccoli. Like I planted it did really well. I planted it early. It was a cool season, and we just got mountains of broccoli. It's like raining broccoli, and the kids like love eating broccoli, and they ate it like every single day. Once the broccoli plants came out, and we just like, okay, we'll get some at the grocery store. Then they stopped eating it. We're like, what the heck, you guys like ate broccoli every single meal, and now all of a sudden, like, what am I supposed to give you? So I think there is something there, and I think it's like you could definitely worry about it, but think about the fact that a farm might have been growing for 40, 50 years on the same soil. If they never did anything to put anything back into it, of course there's not going to be as many minerals available. But if you are working on improving your soil constantly, then it's going to get better and your produce will always taste better. So I think it's important. And I think I love this too because as I mentioned at the start, like I was thinking maybe I'll go do farming. And that's why I learned a lot of
Mhm.
my background gardening information from absorbing content from farmers, from market farmers. And just quick transition, but I wanted to mention if you guys wanted to learn more about the market farming, we've actually toured a couple market farms on the Epic Gardening like main YouTube channel. There's Andrew from Indian Summer Farms, and then Spencer up at Sage Hill Ranch Gardens, and both super amazing local market gardeners. If you guys want to peek into that world, but I'd love to hear from you, Logan, because you've traveled to so many of these farms. I'm sure that there are pieces of those puzzles that you've thought to bring down into the gardening world. Do you feel like there's a lot to learn there? Do you think they're totally different systems? Or what's your feeling on that?
I feel like there's so much to learn. And so I've worked on over 15 different organic farms of different scales, like I said, ranging from 1 acre to 60 acres. And I have visited dozens more. And the number one thing that I found applies back to gardening and homesteading on a really small scale is the no-till approach or the reduced tillage
Mm,
approach. And it actually surprised me when I went from farming like back to gardening. I was like, wow, there's a lot of people going to Home Depot and like renting a rototiller as the beginning of their garden. And I had done that before too, before I knew
yeah.
anything about soil in my very first garden in Oregon. And once you start learning about soil structure, you realize that the rototiller and the disruption is really making your job as a gardener a lot harder. And so, one of my favorite tools that I actually used on a lot of these farms was a broad fork. And I
Oh,
feel like
yeah.
the broad fork is underutilized. It's not used that much in gardens, and it became my absolute favorite tool. It is a nice workout, but it's a upright standing leg workout that does not hurt your back, which is really pleasant because farming was extremely hard on the back, and gardening can be too. And so we love upright activities.
No, that's totally
um,
true, and it's actually something I've used a decent amount now. Whether it's a broad fork, or oftentimes I'll do it with just like a garden fork, just to show people if you don't want to buy like this whole broad fork, which is more ergonomic
yes.
for sure, you could use a garden fork and try to break your soil. And like the whole idea of that tilling at the beginning is really interesting. I personally think that tilling at the start maybe not as big of a deal. You can incorporate a little bit of boost to your garden. It all depends on where you're at. Like here, my soil is
Yeah.
dry for 9 months of the year. So there's very little like active life in there because it doesn't rain, it's uncovered, it would just die. So at the beginning, like I did work the soil a lot more, but I totally agree that decreasing the amount of digging, and I don't really ever do tillage like in that sense, but I will dig my soil. I'll break it up with like a fork, and I just try to like not mess with it too much. The main thing I try to do is if you have soil, you don't want to invert it. I at least try to keep my layers where they
Exactly.
are. So like maybe I'll crack it, but I'm not trying to like mess up where things are and who lives where because they already know where they live. I don't want to tell them to live somewhere else. Like that's why they're there.
Exactly. Yeah, I like to think of this soil as a layered cake. So you have all these nice, pretty layers that have already arranged themselves. In soil science, we call them horizons, which I think is really beautiful. But each soil horizon is different for every soil, depending on the bedrock, depending on, if you're in the country or the city or what part of the world. But they all naturally want to be in layers. And so, like Jacques said, tilling to establish a garden, there's nothing wrong with that because usually where, we have like a lawn or a bunch of overgrown weeds or whatever. But the
Right.
goal with reducing disturbance is to not continue the tilling. It's to get it established, get air pockets and air holes going in, trying not to flip the layers of cake together, but just get nutrients and air down there so it's easier for our plants to get established. And then once that's in place, we have to master the bed flip. And so this is the second big thing that I learned that applies to market gardens and small scale. It's like, what's a bed flip? How do you transition from one crop to the next without tilling it? And this is like a major conundrum that even the most professional farmers face because every crop is different, the roots are different, the status
Mm.
of the bed is different. So
Oh
how do
yeah.
you? What's your favorite bed flip method in your garden?
So actually, this is I love the idea of the bed flip too because I think I spent so much time learning from different farming people or farming books, and the bed flip is a big part of it, as you allude to it. And so actually, one of the first videos I made on my channel was called like "How I Flip a Garden Bed," and a lot of people were like, "What do you mean flip?" Like in the comments, I was like, "Oh, totally. Like, why would you know what flipping a bed is? Like, is that flipping a mattress over?" Like, so what I ended up doing,
It's farm lingo.
yeah. So what I ended up doing in that video, and it's still the main thing I really do today, and I think it's so simple, is let's say I have a bed of tomatoes out there. They've been growing for like 6, 8 months. So they've been in there for a long time. I know the soil is going to be depleted of some nutrients. They've been producing fruits. I'm harvesting, I'm eating them. Every time I take something away from the garden and eating it, like now I'm eating those minerals. They're no longer in my garden, is how I think about it. So it's like every harvest is technically pulling a little bit out. So what I like to do, especially after a long haul plant like that, is I'll remove all the plants by just cutting them at the soil level for the most any plant. Then I'll go through, I'll fork the soil, I'll scatter some organic fertilizer, or I'll do that first if I remember, so that when I fork it, it drops into the soil. And then after that, I come by with a layer of compost, and then I cover it all up with some straw mulch. And that pretty much always works well for me. I feel like I get to loosen up the soil, help break up the roots that I left in there. The fertilizer will add a little bit of a bonus feed to that plant at the beginning. The compost will slowly break down and help fertilizer break down even faster since it's organic. And then the mulch will just trap all that water and nutrients in that like little layered cake scenario. So that's kind of like my standard go-to. The problem I often run into is somebody who gardens, I guess I could say chaotically sometimes. I'll have like, I have like one bed right now. It's the craziest bed I've ever planted. It's got melon, watermelon, okra, peppers, lettuce, basil, something else. And I'm like, none of these plants are going to be done at the same time.
Wow.
Like, how am I going to even like turn this around? So in those scenarios, I kind of will just not maybe flip it and just do like a little compost pile, fresh plant in that one area. But those are kind of the things I do.
Mhm.
I don't know if there's like
Yeah,
a special
that's
sauce that you
amazing.
like to do.
That is, you actually touched on exactly what we would do on the smaller scale market gardens, but the concept is the same on a larger scale too. The most important thing is leaving those roots intact, which kind of goes against a lot of what we're taught in conventional gardening and farming. It's like rip out the
Yeah,
roots, start the next thing. But if you think of in wild ecosystems, the roots always stay and they decompose. And when you're trying to aerate soil, especially if you have really compacted soil, leaving the roots is
absolutely.
creating air spaces. And so all the microbes can still hang out there and like maintain their thriving ecosystems so they can easily colonize the roots of the next plants. So whether you do what Jacques was talking about, where you like use loppers or pruners and you just cut the plant off at the base, or if you were growing in an in-ground bed, you could even run a lawnmower over it, which is what we
Oh
used to
yeah,
do with like big beds of, yeah, like big beds of lettuce or something like that that's easy to chop up. We also used different mechanical implements like a BCS, which is just like a
right.
flail mower essentially. It's similar to a lawnmower. And it chops those residues into small pieces, and often you can like leave them in place and then add that icing layer cake, the compost icing on the top, and then you've got a new bed like ready to go. So that flip, like leaving the roots intact, is such an underrated hack for improving your soil, and it makes life easier because you can really hurt your back trying to like tug
Yeah,
out some plants.
I think it's like for me, I get why people maybe don't want to do it because you're like, well, aren't those roots going to get in the way? Um, they really don't. Like sometimes it depends on like if you planted like a crazy dense bed or something, and there's like a lot of stumps and roots, like maybe. But like you mentioned, like bacteria and all sorts of beneficials live along those roots, like good stuff that you want to keep, just to be clear. And if you plant like another thing next to it that has the same association, well, now they'll just move over and they'll help that plant. And as those roots break down, as you mentioned, they leave the airspace. That allows water to get into your soil too. And there's nutrients in those roots. So if you rip them out, you're also just removing a little bit more nutrients that otherwise would decompose. So I have often been like, man, I wish I had a lawnmower because I'll chop and drop occasionally and I'll grow like a whole bed of fava beans
Uh-huh.
and I'll just do it manually. And it takes a little bit of time, but it's fine. I get to sit outside, use a sharp shovel, get a workout, chop it all up. Breaks down so nicely. My beds do really great from it. And I just think it's fun. I think it's fun to try to reduce the amount of stuff I have to bring in to put in my garden because I also don't want it to be something that's expensive or limiting for people. So it's like if you could throw a handful of seeds and help your garden do better next year instead of buying like a bag of fertilizer, then that's an option for you that somebody could take. So I love that idea so much. And I think it's just about experimenting. People just need to try something to believe it. And I get it because I'm like that as well. But I just recommend everyone try. Like if you don't think it's going to work, give one bed a test. See how it does for you. You'll see that it is like Logan said, it's less work. That's one of the things I don't get. It's like literally less work. It's easier on my body and it's also fun. So I love it. Yeah. Totally on board with all that.
Absolutely. And so I guess I've thought of a third thing in that taking from the small scale market garden to home scale gardening. So first we talked about broad forking or using a digging fork to aerate the soil without flipping over the cake layers. Second, we talked about the art of the bed flip, which is the transition from one
Yeah.
crop to the next. And then piggybacking on that is the idea of succession planting. So I found as I work farmers markets in many different parts of the country, whether the Pacific Northwest or in Montana or in Tennessee or in New Hampshire, regardless of how oriented people are with the food system, they still don't fully know that you can grow multiple rounds of a crop in a year. So a lot of us think like, okay, tomato season or zucchini season is only this like 1 month of summer. But that's not actually the case. In our gardens, depending on your zone, you can grow several successions of a crop. And what I mean by that is a succession would be like one planting. So if I love carrots, I could actually plant carrots every 2 weeks, all season long. I may need to change the variety and get like a more heat tolerant carrot for the midsummer, a fall storage carrot for later in the summer to mature in the fall. But at any given time, if you have a crop you love, ideally you should have that crop as a baby seedling, an almost mature, and then a planting that you're harvesting off of right now. And that, just learning that alone, the succession planting was such a game changer for me of realizing, wait, it doesn't have to be so fleeting. I could have another round of this crop coming up next.
It's one of these things that it's kind of like the golden goose for gardening that I think people have heard the concept. It sounds kind of stressful because it's like, oh, now I have to start seeds all the time. Like it's like this whole stressful thing. And it's funny for me because when I think what you mentioned earlier with like, you only have this season, being in San Diego is so weird because I could kind of grow a lot of things all year if I really wanted to, which makes it really hard to decide when to do things sometimes. But that's like complaining about a non-existent problem. So what I've done to try to simplify succession sowing, because it can be like, oh, like I have to make sure I start this and make sure I cycle it and maximize my garden. Here's how I think about it. This year, I tried to do it really carefully, or not carefully, very loosely, I should say. So I had my first round of tomatoes. I started them in like January. Started the seeds, potted them up, planted them sometime in March. When I planted those, I started a new set of seeds because I wanted some early on in case it was a warmer season. Maybe I didn't like some of the varieties, I'll remove them. So I started another round. Then once those got planted, I waited like a month and I started another round. So I ended up doing like 3 successions of tomatoes and I actually just did a 4th because I'm going to try to pull some off in the greenhouse this winter. But that's really helped me a lot because that first round produced very heavily. Then I got kind of tired. It took a little break, maybe that heat spell comes in. That second round was able to produce. So I was able to have tomatoes over a much longer period of time on like a consistent basis instead of just like peak and valley of harvest. So that's been kind of one approach is like you could succession anything in the garden, but I think like what you were alluding to, if you love carrots, just focus on successioning that one. If you love tomatoes like I do, focus on figuring out how can I get more tomatoes throughout the year. And succession planting is really a really fantastic way to do it. So I think, again, like it's one of those things like just try it. Just try like a little taste of it. You don't have to fully commit. Just choose a plant that you want a lot of and give that one a go. So I think those are all three like fantastic tips. And I guess some that I've sort of worked into my gardening habit just through observing
Sounds
farmers
like it.
and like people working on the farms. Because I mean, in the end of the day, like if you're a small market farmer, you only can exist if you are profitable, right? So you're not doing things that are a waste of time. You're not doing something that doesn't work. Like in my mind, if you're doing it, it's because it's a good idea and your livelihood depends on it. So it's probably a good idea for me to try that as well because I don't have the same stakes, but I do want to have a successful vegetable garden for as long as I can. So a lot of lessons from the farmers there for sure. Um, I do want to mention, you did say you had visited in San Diego and you were on your way up to where you are now, which is Alaska. So you kind of have traveled over, is that like all of the zones that we have in like the continental United
In
States?
the US.
Like all the way down from like
Yes.
10B San Diego up to, I don't even know what zone Alaska hits. Like, it's weird, right? Like, what zone are you up in?
Well, Alaska is the biggest state in the US. And so, in actually on maps, I've realized that it is not nearly represented how massive
Oh,
it
yeah.
is. So, the first place I went was Fairbanks, which is the farthest north, major city in Alaska, and they're zone 2B. So, extremely frigid winters. But guess what? They had a thriving farmers market. And the reason why is because of the midnight sun, which is one of my favorite parts of this
So
summer,
weird.
was experiencing the midnight sun. Absolutely mind blowing. So, the summer solstice, I actually went to the Midnight Sun Festival in Fairbanks, which was on the summer solstice on June 20th. And that is the longest day of the year everywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. But in Fairbanks, Alaska, that is the day that the sun actually shines for the full 24 hours at its fullest intensity. So you can go outside at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and the sun is fully out and blasting. And so you can
That's
only
so wild.
imagine plants are double photosynthesizing, like they are
Yeah.
photosynthesizing nonstop. So
Wow,
while
that's full
gardeners
sun, full
in
sun.
that part, yeah, exactly. So while gardeners in that part of Alaska are limited by extremely frigid winters, their plants are growing twice as fast during the brief kind of like 4-month growing season. They're literally double the size. They can double in size like overnight. And so Alaska continuously wins the, like biggest pumpkin and biggest
Oh,
zucchini,
yeah.
outrageously large vegetables. And that's why.
Yeah, Kevin has tried to compete in this space, but he knows, we've talked about it. He's like, can't compete with those in Alaska. Just don't have enough sun. But it is really interesting because it actually makes me want to talk about zones. I don't know how you feel about zones, but this is like such a funny topic to me because here I'm in zone 10B, San Diego. So people are like, oh man,
Mhm.
10B, like maybe that means it's really hot where you are. And no, it doesn't really mean anything. All it means is that it doesn't like snow. I don't get a frost really. Sometimes I'll get a light frost, but like temperature is pretty mild. Okra hates growing here. It's not hot enough for okra, but I plant it every year and it looks really pathetic here. But at the same time, you look at somewhere like over where you're at, zone 2B, like you will look up your plants and it'll say you can't grow tomatoes there because tomatoes don't grow in zone 2, right? So then like, oh well, I can't garden. But it doesn't really mean that. It just it's like an extreme low temperature and that's it. And I've even gone to websites and like typed in my zone like 10B and they're like, oh, you can't grow any grapes where you are, or like none of these fruit trees will work because you're in the wrong zone. I'm like, that's just not true. Like it's just simply not how plants work. They don't care about what zone designation we have. They just need to grow in the right time period.
Exactly. And yeah, I agree. The zones are so misleading because also where I am now actually is in southeastern Alaska. I've spent the last few months near Homer, which is the halibut fishing capital of the world. And they also have a thriving farmers market. But guess what zone they are?
Oh, same state.
6B.
Whoa, 6B? That's pretty decent.
Yeah,
That's not
because they're
bad.
coastal.
Like,
So they,
yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
so they have milder winters.
That's cool. Yeah,
And
I think my limit is zone 8. If I had to move, I thought about it 8.
yeah, I mean, it's still a shortened growing season, but again, those zones really don't tell you much about the actual climate. And what you brought up is so important that gardeners should never get discouraged by the zone things. Because let me tell y'all, I have farmed in far northern Montana, far northern New Hampshire, which were like zones 3 and 4, and then I farmed in Florida. So all of those places are actually growing similar crops. Like we're all growing similar things with similar seeds from like botanical interest or Johnny's, or like literally farmers all over the country are sourcing these same seeds. And the secret is knowing the zones really will tell you where a plant can overwinter. But there's so many
Hmm.
perennials that we can grow as annuals. And that designation, I think, gets really confusing when you're a beginner.
I agree. And I think it's one of the things where I always encourage people to just try. Like, don't plant your whole garden in something that maybe somebody says doesn't work, but like try one out. It might work. Like, for example, I have rhubarb in my garden. I think most people say like rhubarb doesn't grow in these hot regions. It's fine, tastes great. I'm planting apple varieties that have really high chill hours. Apparently, they don't work here, but I've heard from other people that they've had great harvests from them. Hardneck garlic, like it does not get cold here, does not frost. But there's one section of my garden right there where I'll occasionally get surface frost on the soil. So I planted my hardneck garlic there and I put it in the fridge for like a month first, just to try a fake winter. Um, but like it's totally doable. You just have to kind of observe your garden. And it's just one of those things like don't expect to figure it all out the first year. Like take your time, look at your garden, respond. I think another great thing that farmers do that I'm very, very, very bad at is journaling. And journaling can really help you keep track of your garden when you might say, oh, I'll remember that. You're not going to remember it. Nobody does. So like just write it down. And like there's that the farmer, famous farmer Elliot Coleman up in Maine. He's written a lot of books about organic
Yeah.
farming. They're really great if you want to expand to that, anyone. But he has this whole like chapter where he's like bragging about how he grows artichokes in Maine. And he's like, take that, California. You can't claim artichokes only. Like we could do it too. We just figured out how to do it, okay? And it's like it's all possible. It's just how much do you want to learn? How much do you want to try? And I encourage everyone to give it a go because you could grow all sorts. Like people grow ginger, turmeric, and like Maine. Like anything is
Yeah.
technically almost possible, but you have to be a little bit clever about it.
Yes, I love that. I love the rebellious state of you, Jacques, saying like this plant can't grow here, watch me. Because
Yeah,
that is
it's like
exactly the mindset I have.
yeah, I'm like I'm not locking my life into only growing Anna's apples because they're mealy and they're kind of boring. I want a pink lady apple from my garden, so I'm gonna try it and I'm gonna grow it. And if it doesn't work, that's gonna be sad, but I'm okay with that. I've accepted it going in because I want to taste the apple. So I think it's like just get out there and like grow what you want because like you're gonna get it if you really want it and you really try. You could probably make it work. Uh, and also like in those
Yes.
farmers markets. Sorry, yeah, but totally. Like I love the little rebellious. I guess I'm not like that outwardly uh sort of rebellious, but I guess in my planting style I can be. Uh, it's interesting, like to hear like you were probably at a market recently, a farmer's market up there. You said in Homer. Like what do they have right now? Is it everything that I would expect to find here?
I would say it's fall crops because it is the fall here. And that's why
Oh,
it was crazy
interesting.
before we got on. Jacques was saying it was like 102 in San Diego yesterday, and
Oh
now the
God.
nights are frosting here. The days are in the 50s, and all the trees are changing
Wow.
color.
Oh, that's cool at least. At least you
So
get
for
that.
September, yeah, yeah, it's really nice at the farmers market. It was absolutely beautiful. So a few things you mentioned. Funny that you grow rhubarb in San Diego because rhubarb loves the cold, notoriously hates the heat, but clearly does fine there. And you can see rhubarb literally has escaped gardens and it just like will grow in the forest. It's not invasive or anything, but you can just see it on the
Yeah.
roadside in Alaska. And I love that. The rhubarb loves it here, and hardneck garlic. The garlic here is amazing. The carrots are amazing because the cold nights, a common
Oh,
theme.
yeah.
Anyone in a cold zone has probably heard this, but as a gardener, it's like those spring and fall crops that have roots or many brassicas like kale, cabbage, etc. They concentrate their sugars in the cold. So that's where cold climate growers usually have the leg up against the hot climate people because the cold makes your carrots sweeter. It makes your kale sweeter and more tender. It makes your cabbage more flavorful. And I found that like, but again, this farmer's market, they also have zucchini. Some people grow tomatoes
Okay.
in high tunnels and low tunnels. There, carrots, cucumbers, amazing onions, amazing garlic, salad mix, kale, broccoli, cauliflower, like all your typical fall
Okay.
crops
Yeah, I like
kind
the
of grow
fall
year
season.
round here.
That's really cool. I think
Yeah, but
uh sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say they definitely have trouble doing peppers. I haven't met anyone in Alaska that successfully grows peppers or eggplant or okra because that is a heat hours thing. And so even with
Yeah,
a greenhouse or a low tunnel, it's just hard to concentrate that amount of heat. And that's something you learn. Like, of course, if you heated a place, you could make it work. Like Jacques said, rebel against the against the status quo for crops. But some things, especially for farmers, are not worthwhile economically
totally.
or even environmentally to heat a greenhouse to grow a few peppers. You know what I mean? It's just not worth it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. It is interesting to think about like the cold climate stuff, like the fact that the plants taste better. And it's something that we even experience in San Diego, even though of course we don't get that intense freeze. In the wintertime, it really doesn't ever creep up over 60. It just kind of like goes like 60-40 every day. And it's cool enough that
Hmm.
plants will taste really great. And like the first time I harvested a cabbage after growing it in the winter here, I was like, the heck is this? This thing is like, it's sweet a little bit, like a subtle sweetness to it. It's like extra crunchy. There's like zero bitterness at all. The kale, amazing. Carrots, like you mentioned. It's so much better. And I think this again goes to this idea that people don't know what stuff is supposed to taste like. Like if you've never had a tomato from a garden and you've only had it from like a grocery store at a restaurant, and you're like, I hate tomatoes, like I get it. You could have that opinion, but like having the real produce at the right time has such a big difference. And even people who think they don't like kale, for example, maybe try it if you could grow it in the winter. It's going to taste so much better. It's not going to be bitter and tough. It'll be like tender and sweet and flavorful. So it is important to understand that we can grow things year round. We could buy things year round, but the flavor, like if you're really trying to nail that flavor down, seasonality is where it's at. And it makes a really big difference. And it's just as simple as that. Just timing can be all it takes to make that big difference in flavor.
Yes, moving with the seasons, of course, is my favorite thing as a traveler. I would joke I'm a sandhill crane, which is a bird that's here in Alaska right now about to make its big migration. These birds fly over 14,000 miles a year
It's so crazy.
from Alaska down to Mexico and South America, which is coincidentally where I am headed next as well. So I relate to the I relate to the birds that move, but I also love embracing the seasonality of every place I go to. And I think that ironically is something I sometimes miss about being in one place with one garden is everyone listening, if you live if you're gardening in one place year round, you have this special opportunity to observe how beautiful the landscape changes throughout the year and all the resources available to you. Because I spend a lot of time in the wilderness, especially in just like far out national forests, open deserts, prairies, and watching the way natural ecosystems have literally nature has built in the exact resources they need at every different time of year. So of course fall leaves are our most obvious example because the tree is letting go of so many nutrients so it can funnel the nutrients down into the roots to survive the winter, and you get all those leaves right there, like free delivered to your garden or your yard, and you can so easily use that resource. Just like in the spring, you can use the new growth of like the fresh succulent green grass clippings or
Right.
lettuce beds or whatever green matter you have. And so nature is giving us everything we need season by season in terms of food, but also in terms of amendments.
That is really cool. And one thing that I wish we had more of in San Diego, because it is great here. I love it. But our season is like, it's a little bit rainy for 3 months. Things look really green. And then everything turns brown. It's not like, it's not even like that gradual. It's like maybe yellow and then brown, but it's just like brown. And then everything is like, because it's our natural native plants. They go, instead of deciduous in the fall where they drop their leaves, they do this thing called drought deciduous, where they just like essentially will shrivel up and allow themselves to die so that they don't waste water, and then they'll regrow from their roots. And that's like a great strategy. It's not as picturesque and pretty as like golden red leaves and like these wonderful trees, but yeah, it's really a shame to not use those resources if you have them, for sure. I highly encourage you guys to use those leaves because they're amazing, and I wish I had access to them. Uh, but it's super fun to hear about farming all over the place and in Alaska. Like, what a wild place to be, and see how people garden there. Must be incredible. I'd love to hear a little bit about like how it is working on the blog. Like, are you kind of the glue? Like, are you working on like making sure our articles are like up to date? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so Epic Gardening is quite the creator of content. We are now putting out 5 articles every single day of the week. And I originally started with Epic Gardening as a writer, taking all of my experience from the academic world and the farming world and bringing that into actionable articles. And now I am the editor of the blog. So I help all of our writers bring the seasonal topics as well as all of our niche topics in everything from like ornamentals to soil building to vegetables to fruits. We have such a range of expertise in our writers, which is so exciting.
Really
And
cool.
um and so I get the opportunity to go through and prepare all those for publication. We have a horticulturalist on staff who fact checks everything that we put out because we really want to make sure that we are scientifically accurate, of course, in all of our presentations. So we try to combine the science and botany of all the plants we're talking about with the practicality and the fun and the actionable advice to use in your garden. So I'm checking that we're citing academic resources and everything is in place. We have proper photos. We have all the information that you need to succeed.
I love it because like I will do a lot of research for videos and stuff, and I will look at our articles because our articles are legit. I love the fact that like, because nowadays when I look for information when I'm trying to refresh on something, you could run into like a lot of like AI stuff that's like just wild card information, and it's just really cool to know that like you're one of the people contributing, you have real experience, and you've done it. Like, it's not just, we're not just like throwing stuff at the wall. It's people who care about gardening, growing food, and they're passionate about it. So I just love to hear that. It's really cool.
Yeah, and that one other note that I really love about working with Epic, because I had been a freelance writer for quite some time. When I transitioned out of farming, I built a writing career so I could work remotely. and travel living full time in my van. I used to have a school bus, now I have a van. And so I use Starlink now to like be on the internet wherever I am. Right now I'm just like in the forested area in Alaska.
That's cool.
But all of that to say that I previously had freelance writing clients that were making the big shift towards AI. And regardless of anyone's opinion on it, not trying to go into that, I'm just saying personally,
Yeah.
I wasn't into it. And I was I was very glad to know that Epic, on all of our articles, we're not producing AI content. We have real people with real life experience, either as gardeners, farmers, nursery owners, plant researchers at universities. We have a huge breadth of people that are providing you with this information. And I think that's why our articles come across as so real, because they are real. And
Yeah.
an AI robot has never gardened.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like playing around with AI as much as anyone else, but when I'm trying to actually learn something, I hope it's coming from somebody who's actually done it. Well, it's been super fun talking with you, Logan. I think we could probably continue on like our soil and farming tangents for hours. Uh, Maybe we will again in a future one. But it was really fun having you on, chatting with you, hearing about the blog and travels and everything related to gardening and farming. So thanks for coming on. It was really, truly a blast chatting with you today.
I'm super grateful. Happy growing, everybody.